Hi, I'm Femi Okay, and you're in the stream. The killing of a young Kenyan woman has fueled a debate over the so-called sugar or sponsor relationships, both at home and across the African continent.
I'm Malika Bilal. We'll look at the dynamics around these partnerships and consider why they're so popular. Send us your thoughts via Twitter and our YouTube chat.
Justice for Sharon, that's the demand that thousands of people across Kenya are making online after the brutal murder of a 26-year-old woman in the southwest of the country.
Sharon Otieno was a second-year student in a so-called sponsored relationship with Okoth Obado, a county governor. He allegedly supported her financially in exchange for her partnership. But when Sharon and a journalist sought an explanation as to why Obado would not support her unborn child, they were abducted by unknown attackers. The journalist escaped, but Sharon was driven away. Her body was found with multiple stab wounds on September 5th. Governor Obado denies involvement in the murder, and an investigation is ongoing.
News of Otieno's death was met with widespread revulsion across Kenya. Gladys Wanga, a member of parliament for Home Bay, tweeted that those responsible should be held accountable, however high or mighty, while Amnesty Kenya said no person deserves the death that Sharon suffered.
But not all opinions were respectful of Sharon's memory. Some tweeted that what happened to Sharon should serve as a lesson to other women in sponsored relationships. Others asked why they should pity Sharon for not focusing on education.
The case has highlighted the complexities and just outright risk within consensual partnerships where one party gives money or property to the other person in exchange for sex or companionship. So today we're talking to three guests about why people maintain these relationships. From the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, we have Nyasha Kandandorora, and she is a journalist and filmmaker who has recently examined sponsor relationships in Kenya for the BBC.
In Johannesburg, South Africa, we have Jackie Pimotse. She's a social activist and the author of Bear, The Blesser's Game.
And right here in our studio, we have Karen Kaz Lucas. She's the host of The Spread. That's a podcast examining sex and relationships. So before we go very much further, ladies, I need to point out to everybody who's watching and following that this is a mature conversation for a mature audience. Welcome, everybody, to our mature conversation. Malika, you start.
Our community is ready to have this conversation. They've been having it already online. So with that, I want to share a video comment we got from a freelance journalist in Nairobi. This is Beatrice, and here's what she had to say.
I joined in the planning for demonstrations and vigils in respect for justice for Sharon because I respect the rule of law and I believe that murder should not be a way of resolving conflict. There has been over 5 murders in the last 3 to 5 years of young girls between the ages of 19 and 30 dying next to prominent politicians to deter the cause of justice and introduce the morality angle where justice ought to be served. The normalization of these murders is what I was speaking about and what I believe Kenya should be shunning other than embrace the sponsorship debate.
So, Nyasha, Sharon Otieno's murder and her killing was really the spark that started a lot of these conversations that we are seeing online today. Here's Beatrice's takeaway from it, that we are focusing on the wrong thing and people online are focusing on the wrong thing. What's your takeaway?
I disagree. What happened to Sharon is terrible and heinous, and justice does need to be brought. The investigation needs to be carried out, and whoever is responsible should, be brought to book. But at the same time, I don't think that should detract from a greater conversation about something that is affecting a lot of people across the continent. Sponsor, blesser, sugar daddy relationships are all over. People know that they're there. I know it makes people uncomfortable, but that's not a reason to talk about it. So I disagree in the sense that, I think people should be embracing the conversation. I think a lot of people have concerns about it, what happens to the girls in these relationships. But if you don't embrace the conversation, how do you actually then tackle these stories? How do you then reach girls like Sharon?
Kaz?
First of all, I'd like to pass my condolences to the family of Sharon Otieno, and I'm deeply saddened by this news. but I think it's a very important conversation. But I also feel like in Nairobi, these conversations are being had. So it's almost like, good morning, would you like a cup of coffee? What did your sponsor do for you yesterday? It's very common. At the hairdressers or at the nail salon, a lot of these women are talking about getting sponsors. A lot of these women talk about the things that they have received from their sponsors. So it's just almost from a more positive, like I have a sponsor angle, as opposed to what are you doing to be safe in these instances? And how can we have conversations about safety regarding, these kind of relationships?
Jackie, bringing you into the conversation, were you surprised that there was a morality conversation going on around what was basically the murder of a young woman who was expecting a child?
Not at all. You would see that in most of these cases, when women go into relationships, people tend to judge despite of the nature. It does not matter if she dates old or young or a peer. But as soon as a murder investigation is brought upon the table, they would not want to necessarily look at the perpetrator. They would change to the table and say, well, what was she doing? Why was she dating this older man? Forgetting that there was consent. And then there was a social responsibility as well. And you look at how history has portrayed itself and has played itself out throughout the years. I mean, polygamous marriages are known to Africans. It's not a new thing. The question is, how was now this relationship leading up to that? Was it even a possibility? If you look at what I looked at from the governor's interview, the press conference he had, my worry was that the man showed no remorse. He did not even allow journalists to question him about the context of the relationship so that the public understands his involvement with his girl, so that it takes away the speculation. And what I looked at as well is that she was with child. She was pregnant. So the women in our society would like to judge people on the choices they make in terms of the relationship, forgetting that this was not just a give and take. They were about to have a family. They were creating something. And it was not a situation where she was not getting educated. She was in university. So when people say things like she should have focused on education, who does not fall in love in high school or even university, who does not have a relationship in university? So we tend to go the moral high code when things go wrong, forgetting that these two people are two adults, two human beings who were in a relationship, but now the question is, what happened to her that the state might be hiding?
Jackie, you mentioned so many things that I wanted to touch on, but I'll hone in on two. One, you mentioned the governor's press conference, and I want to share with our audience, just in case they're not aware. Governor Obado held a press conference, this from Kenyans.co.ke, on the murder. He said he would do what he can to assist in the probe, and he said he was distressed at this. So that is what you were referencing there. But you mentioned this being two adults, and it often turning into victim blaming. This is Wicked, that's their handle. They say the mixed reactions to Sharon's death say more about what our society think of women than it does of sponsor culture. Some even went so far as to blaming the murder victim for her death. What this says about the larger sentiment towards sponsor culture is that only the women are castigated, but these relationships have two consenting parties that benefit. Kaz, I want to give this to you. Two parties involved in this.
So this always happens, and especially now with a lot of access to social media. In any kind of relationship that involves a man and a woman, if something goes wrong, if, for example, somebody leaks something, or if it's a relationship like a sponsor and a sponsee situation and something goes wrong, the woman always gets blamed. So, and it's the sad part about it is that it's women who are shaming other women. And I mean, first of all, I feel like as a culture, we need to get away from, like she had said earlier, our moral high ground. We need to get away from shaming other women and just allowing people to do what they want. If they're adulting, if they're consenting adults, allowing them to do what they want with their bodies and to make their own choices in the relationships that they have.
Kaz, it's so interesting that you said that, because our Nairobi bureau team went out earlier on on Tuesday to ask young people, what do you feel about sponsor-sponsee relationships? And this is what some of them told us. Have a look.
I think it's everyone's choice. Like, it's not an end and it's not an embarrassment. It just depends on your reasons for doing it.
I would never do that because there's the morality part, and have been brought up that it's not right. It's not worth it.
I think we should not judge anyone, and people should do what they want to do. If you want to get sponsored, if you want to sponsor anyone, do what you want. It's your life.
It's very shameful, yes, and indecent.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah, because you're degrading yourself as a lady. Yes, like you're not giving yourself a value. It's like you're exchanging money, your all value, all that God has put in you, for money, and it doesn't really make sense.
Oh my goodness, ending there with shame and God all in the same sentence. Let me show you some of the work that Nyasha has been doing in collaboration with the BBC. Sex and the Sugar Daddy looks at 3 women's stories and clarifies very clearly what this idea of a sponsor is. What are they supposed to do? A rich older man who lavishes gifts on a young woman in return for sexual favours, also known as a blesser or a sugar daddy. Nyasha, how common did you find this to be?
I found most people I met with around Kenya, from the coast all the way to Western Kenya, where one of the characters came from, was that everyone could tell me that they knew of someone with this story, whether it was their uncle who was involved in a sponsor relationship, or their neighbor, or a student that they went to school with, or a coworker. These stories are common. It's just that people don't really want to talk about it. And when you looked at the research that was conducted by the Busara Center that looked specifically at university students, you know, they found that 20% of the girls said at one point in time or currently they had a sponsor relationship. So I think that those numbers, and just my experience of talking to people, not just in Nairobi, also in rural communities, did reflect that it is more common than people would like to believe.
I want to share a tweet from someone else another organization that has talked to people. This is Price of Silence. They tweet in, "We have worked with women in these relations, most specifically stateless women in Nairobi, who use these relationships as a means of survival and legitimacy. But how can a relationship be equitable when it's constructed upon an imbalanced power dynamic?" So there's one thought there. On the other hand, though, we got a comment, this is just minutes ago live on YouTube. Their actual handle is For Real, and they write, "A woman can either be a poor man's slave or an old man's doll, and I choose to be a doll." Jackie, what can you tell us about that type of thinking?
A lot of people have different opinions. When it comes to this, young women are really struggling, and they are trying to find solutions to their problem, whether it's getting tuition, accommodation, providing for a family. They find, and unfortunately, the sugar daddy phenomena happens to be the easiest way to get. Because men are looking for girls that can entertain them, that can offer them services, sexual services, and they have some kind of social power or money or influence in their communities. And sometimes for women, you would see that it is a quick get up from whatever situation they can get. And then you will see when they're in those relationships, then you have the power struggle. The woman becomes the victim of the relationship itself, whether it's through a killing, abuse, physical abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, or even sometimes conforms to have unconsented sex with the person. So if we get comments like these or opinions like these, you will see that it's a struggle, you know. People don't even know where would they get a loaf of bread tomorrow, or where will they get their next job.
Jackie, I just want to interject there because I want to make sure that our audience is on the same page that I am on, that, you know, you're speaking to this almost as though you're coming from an anthropological stance, but you have firsthand experience. You wrote a book about it, about being a sponsee.
Yes, I did. For me, it was not honestly a case of poverty. It was a case of being part of a social circle in an industry. I was involved in the fashion industry, and that was extremely demanding on lifestyle and travel. And at that particular time, this is now 2012, and you would find that it's really difficult to be in such an industry that has so much influential people that govern fashion houses, and they control the whole system. And you find yourself being involved with a man who says, okay, for you to get a cover shoot or to get this, you have to do this for me. And then you end up being in that type of relationship. And throughout the years, I have found
Jackie, do you mind if I ask you, did you love your sponsor? Was there affection, love, or was it purely transactional? You loved him?
No, it was not transactional, funny enough, to begin with, because it was a pure relationship for a year. We dated for 3.5 years. And then towards the second 2 years, it was purely transactional because he became abusive. So you sort of become detached to the person as soon as abuse comes in. It becomes a love-hate relationship at the end of the day. So sometimes, for me, let me speak for myself, I was in love with him for a year. And then when the abuse came in, I just saw that at some point he's going to kill me. That's why I was so drawn to Sharon's story, because I could see that, well, this probably could have been me at some point.
Let me just take a pause for a moment. I want to play a little clip from Nyasha's work about sugar daddies and sugar babies. And this is Grace, and she's going prospecting, looking for a sponsor to actually fund her lifestyle. Have a look.
I'll be going to clubs, buy the first drink, and then maybe someone sees you and they like you, and then they offer to buy you more drinks. That's how most girls like me do.
Of course, there are many white men with cash, even black men with cash. I was thinking I would go there and get support.
Nyasha, as I was going through your piece and the stories and the background stories to the women, it felt to me like this was almost like having an extra fund. It was like a trust fund. So if you were running out of cash and you needed to, make a video or get some shoes for your little girl, or you wanted just some nice clothes to wear, call your sponsor and your sponsor will show up with some money. That's what it felt like to me. It was like an additional fund, a finance fund. So it was a business deal that was going on here, that is going on here.
Femi, certainly a lot of relationships are like that. A lot of people would say, I just need some extra groceries, or I can't make rent this month. Can you help me? Can you give me a little bit of something on the side? This was a very common phenomenon I found, that people use this to supplement their lives. The university students will have, for instance, their school fees paid, but at the same time they're looking to have a new phone, or they're looking to have an extra something to go buy some clothes, and so they ask for maybe the equivalent of $50 at the end of the month, or the equivalent of $100. So a lot of people do use this type of money to supplement their lives. Some people, to the extent that they then save the money and go and invest it into businesses, for instance. I have met women who would take the money and went and bought land and started, doing something else with the money that would then bring further returns, and still maintain a relationship with the sponsor just in case they needed something in case of an emergency.
I completely agree with that as well. But just going back a little bit further, I wanted to talk about the fact that so many people feel like these interactions only happen because people are in impoverished areas. And so the interaction happens between a girl that's trying to make ends meet with a man that's older because he's going to provide food for the family. And that's not how it happens. It's happening across the board. There's women who come from very wealthy families and have everything that they need, but they still want more. And this
socialites. In fact, that's something that I've seen in Nyasha's work, is that you may already be middle class, but you want to be upper class.
Exactly. And
fly first class.
And even then, there's women who are flying first class in business, but they still want more.
Where else is there to go after first class?
Just there's always more.
Wow.
I don't know. You want to sit in the cockpit. pilots with the pilots.
Do you know what we haven't talked about? And I know you've got insight and friends who are sponsors.
That's true.
The sponsor perspective. What are they thinking about?
So I feel like a lot of these men want to be seen in their social circles as having these trophy girlfriends. Because when they got married, they had these beautiful wives, and now they're older, and I guess they're going through their midlife crisis and want to be seen with these younger women. And I feel a lot of the time that this goes back to, and I think it's a conversation we need to discuss, the paying of bride price, and it's men feeling that they have ownership over women. And I think it stems from that culturally knowing that men can own women financially. If I pay for her, she's mine. And it's just owning this trophy. And for men, I feel that's all it is. These men are so happy to be in their social circles with the most beautiful girl in town or the most famous girl in town. And that's how it works.
I think that dovetails really nicely with this tweet from Mundir, who seems to be on the same wavelength. He says most of these young girls view those in this blessed lifestyle as role models because money is the motive. Having a sugar daddy is an easy way to riches, but ultimately has got its own consequences. So when we move to consequences, I want to play a video comment from someone who speaks about several of them. This is Sandra Omo, and she's the founder of an organization called Safe Love International.
These sponsor relationships are often characterized by control, sexual exploitation, violence, unplanned pregnancies, and sexually transmitted diseases, because girls are often less able to insist on safe sex practices when involved in such. In sub-Saharan Africa, for example, HIV rates are up to 5 times higher amongst young females compared to males of the same age. And intergenerational sex, this same sponsor culture, is one of the drivers of the pandemic amongst young girls and women in this part of the world. This is a huge societal problem, which we are trying currently to address by scaling a huge risk intervention program to young girls and women across Nigeria. We believe that this knowledge is a powerful way to change behavior.
So Jackie, when we talk about the dangers, what would you have wished your younger self would have known?
Don't do it. You know what? When you look at the dangers of this kind of lifestyle, I mean, there's sex cults, there's money laundering, there's death, there's human trafficking, there's mental health, they commit suicide and so forth. I wish I had known these dangers before I went in. You know, what are the impacts? How is it going to affect me mentally? How is it going to affect me emotionally? You know, and most importantly, the opportunity cost of your entire life, the time wasted, the 3.5 years wasted being with someone, whereas you could have completed a degree, you could have found a better job, you could have gotten better opportunities. You could have been better informed and educated about life issues. And sometimes that's life that you can't turn back. Sure. That's a decision that you cannot turn back. And so unfortunate to see that Sharon made her decision and it led her up to this. And now we're speaking on her behalf because we're fighting to make sure that this does not happen to another person. You know, so that's why I think that was also one of the reasons why I decided to write a book, because people don't believe when you tell them to get out of situations. Right. They learn the hard way when it's really too late.
Jackie, they learn the hard way. Just hold tight for a minute, because I've got 1 minute left in the show, and I don't want to let Kaz off the hook. When you were young, you were a sugar baby.
I'm so young.
Right?
Well, actually, I've never had the experience of being a sugar baby. I will say that the thought did cross my mind often. I did get into sexual relations at a very young age.
With somebody who was
much older. With men who were older, unfortunately. But just going off what Jackie said, I just want to say that if there was more education for these young girls to be able to get into sex work from a legal way and a nicer way, then I think things would be different.
Malika.
2 comments. Kibet says, this is not empowerment, this is prostitution as a way of income. On the other side on YouTube, CK says, I learned a lot of hard lessons being involved in these types of relationships. They made me grow as a person. I had to learn where my boundaries are, and I grew into an empowered woman.
Oh my goodness, we could start a whole new conversation, but we don't have time. We do have time though to look at my computer. Here I want you to look at the work of our guests, Sex and the Sugar Daddy. That is Nyasha's work. If you have a look at the podcast, The Spread, you'll be impressed by Kaz and her partner's work here, and not forgetting Jackie at Jackie Fomatose, and you can find her on Twitter as well. Our conversation continues always online at AJ Stream. Malika and I will see you soon. Thanks for watching.